Hello and welcome to this week's video email. When does a Soundmaker become an instrument? I've been thinking about this question a lot this week. In many nursery and early years settings, I often hear a similar idea. It's fine to use homemade instruments at this age. They make the same sorts of noises. And very often this sits alongside another reality. Budgets are tight. Priorities are many, and it can feel hard to justify spending money on high-quality musical instruments for very young children. So homemade solutions become the practical answer. They're resourceful, they're creative, they're accessible, and sometimes they're all that's available. But this leads to another question. Is making a sound the same as playing an instrument? When we think about children playing instruments, we often picture older children, a drum circle, a xylophone pattern, a group keeping the beat together. But instrumental learning actually begins much earlier than that. Long before children are able to follow a rhythm or coordinate their playing with others, they're discovering something far simpler and far more important. Cause and effect, a movement, a sound. A small hand closes around the handle of a bell. A shake produces a jingle. And suddenly the world becomes interactive. At this stage, children aren't trying to make music as we might define it. They're exploring. What happens when I move? How does this feel in my hand? What changes if I do it again, differently? And this is where the distinction begins to matter, because not all sound makers respond in the same way. A well-made instrument offers consistency. A bell will ring clearly with even the smallest movement. A drum will respond differently to a tap, a pat, or a stronger beat. A shaker will give immediate feedback through both sound and vibration. These responses aren't accidental, they're designed, and that design helps children begin to notice something subtle but important. The movements I make change the quality of the sound I produce. There's another layer to this too, one that's easy to overlook in the early childhood years. Real instruments also allow adults to model how they're used, how to hold a beater so the wrist can move freely, how to strike a drum so that it resonates instead of being muffled, how to shake a shaker using the whole arm rather than just the fingers. These are small, gentle pieces of guidance, not to control children's exploration, but to expand what becomes possible. Children will still experiment in their own unique ways. They will still discover unusual sounds and unexpected techniques. But alongside that exploration, they're also beginning to build the physical habits that later make coordinated, confident playing possible. We're not just supporting sound making in the moment, we are laying the foundations for future musical fluency. When a sound maker is unpredictable, quiet, or difficult to activate, that connection can become blurred. The child may still enjoy the experience, but the learning is less clear. The feedback is less immediate, and the physical techniques are less transferable. And this is often the part that's hardest to explain, because from the outside, it can look like they're just making noise anyway. If you've ever found yourself trying to explain this, why a real instrument matters at this age, you're not alone. So here's one way to frame it. It's not about the sound being better, it's about the learning being clearer. Instruments don't just make sound clearer, they make learning clearer. A responsive instrument helps a child notice cause and effect more easily, repeat actions with purpose, refine their movement, stay engaged for longer, and begin developing coordinated actions for later musical skills. This clearer learning supports the very foundations of musical development. Homemade instruments still have a place. They support creativity, exploration, and invention, but they don't always offer the same feedback or modelling opportunities. And sometimes that difference matters more than we realise. So instead of arguing for more instruments, we can gently shift the conversation from they can make sounds with anything to what helps them learn the most about how their bodies create sound. How easily can they connect movement to sound? Before children can play with others, they need to discover that their own actions have a clear impact. A shake, a tap, a jingle. These are the first musical exchanges between body and sound. And when an adult joins in, the exchange becomes shared. Music moves from exploration to connection, to control, to skill. Perhaps the question isn't whether a sound maker can replace an instrument, but what kind of learning we want to make possible, now and in the years to follow. Next week, I'll explore what happens when children begin to deliberately change the sound. But for now, many thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.